Discover 7 amazing surreal inventions that transform our understanding of reality forever. The ad blared brightly from Mark's tablet, its colors too vivid against the dim light of his cluttered kitchen. It felt like mocking magic. Mark's heart sank deeper into despair. He had spent years tinkering away on ideas that danced on the edge of genius in an unyielding world. Each bill that arrived in a sharp envelope seemed to echo back the chorus of failures that haunted him since he lost his job. His father, a man who wore fatigue like a second skin from decades of factory labor, looked on with a frown that was both a reflection of love and disappointment. Mark had discovered the secret of creation, yet here was his life, reduced to a series of unpaid debts. In a moment of desperation, he turned to his late grandfather's workshop, a sanctuary of curiosity where the scent of rust and wood shuffle lingered. He dove into boxes of half-finished ideas, becoming entranced by sleek mechanisms and peculiar gadgets that looked like puzzles yearning to be solved. What if one of these inventions could change everything? But as hope filled him, guilt swirled around his thoughts. Did he dare pursue fortune at the cost of his community? The ghosts of past complaints whispered in his head, silent reminders that shaky motivations led to broken promises. Staring at the surreal inventions, Mark wrestled with a moral dilemma. Should they be withheld from the world, safe from greedy hands, or shared, risking that they might be manipulated for profit, further alienating his beleaguered neighbors? He felt stabs of urgency piercing through his chest. Could he be the villain in a narrative he longed to be the hero of? That gnawing feeling forced him to question whether his path was selfish or enlightened. Was ambition a pathway to liberation or ruin? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With each prototype he polished, the thought of showcasing them gnawed at him. When he finally revealed a captivating widget at the town hall, eyes turned to him, yet the support he craved felt shredded by disbelief. Tradition wrapped its arms tightly around the townsfolk, and when they grew cold to his vision, the weight of their indifference pressed hard against his chest. One day a slender man in a suit approached him with promises that felt like an ill-timed joke, offering financial salvation woven with strings that threatened his hometown's fragile fabric. It all felt so twisted. Was survival worth jeopardizing the roots that held them together? The dread swelled as he confronted the harsh reality of his choices. Visions of his father's tired face swirled with the excitement of invention, leaving him wrestling with the haunting question of loyalty. The room filled with murmurs of dissent weighed against that exhilarating whisper of ambition. Then came Samuel, a shadowy figure who saw the flicker in Mark's eyes. With a crooked smile he spoke of courage not tied to profit, yet tainted with heavy burdens, the legacy of loss and hope. As Mark stood on the brink, contemplating old family lesson etched in silence, he felt both renewed purpose and suffocating dread. Would he veer away from the expectations that had crushed his spirit, or embrace a chance to redefine success for a whole industry? The letter, rewritten decades earlier, lingered on his mind, a conundrum shrouded in mystery that might hold the key. With hope battling fear, the path forward seemed agonizingly unclear. Mark stood at a precipice, and the stakes had never been higher as he became entangled in the fragile threads of his future, teetering on a decision that could redefine him forever. Mark awoke the next morning with a sense of urgency thrumming in his chest. The sunlight filtered through the window like a spotlight, illuminating the clutter of the workshop, a motley collection of failed dreams and fractured ambitions. He couldn't ignore the lurking weight of expectation pressing down on him. With each passing moment, the indecision clawed deeper into his psyche, threatening to unravel the fragile tapestry of his identity. He took a deep breath and surveyed his surroundings. The inventions, remnants of his grandfather's legacy, loomed before him as both a source of inspiration and a stark reminder of his current plight. Mark's fingers brushed against the cool metal of an unfinished gadget, a prototype that, in its current state, held nothing but potential. Yet that potential was tethered to a question he could no longer avoid. What was he ultimately trying to achieve? Was it respect and recognition from his peers, or something deeper, a chance to make a meaningful impact? When he envisioned his crowd's skeptical faces from the town hall's presentation, frustration bubbled within him. They had seen the widget as a mere novelty, not as a beacon of hope for the community. Was this truly a matter of perception? What if Samuel was right? Could success exist outside the relentless grasp of profit-driven motives? Mark habitually found himself straddling the line between determination and self-doubt, but now he realized that avoiding his fears only tightened their grasp. Determined to break free from that mental fog, Mark grabbed a notebook and hurried to a corner of the workshop. The blank pages stared up at him, inviting him to redefine his approach. He scribbled a list of his inventions, a catalog of dreams, not just products. Next to each, he wrote down the potential benefits they might offer to his community: enhanced accessibility, better resource management, even improvements for local artisans. Each idea he penned ignited a flicker of excitement, pushing against the shadows of despair consuming him. Yet with every stroke of his pen, he also felt the familiar pang of dread. What if his aspirations were impossibly naive? The specter of failure often loomed large, threatening to overshadow any glimmer of hope. But then he remembered the content of that letter from decades ago, one that tied his family's dreams to the values of innovation and resilience. If the message inside held such promise, how could he continue to hide behind fear? His resolve strengthened. Mark needed a plan, not just to innovate but to educate and engage his neighbors about what these inventions could mean for their lives. They had to see the value in his creations beyond the confines of skepticism. The thought blossomed in his mind, a workshop, open for all, where he could share his passion for invention. He envisioned people gathering, not merely to watch, but to participate and share ideas. Collaboration would not only bring fresh perspectives, but also surmount the chasm of tradition that had so firmly anchored their community to the past. But this idea was not without peril. Would the townsfolk embrace a changing tide, or would they remain steadfast in their outdated perceptions? Mark understood that leading a charge into the unknown required potential sacrifices, and those sacrifices might include facing open hostility or skepticism from those he yearned to uplift. As he laid out the framework for his community workshop initiative, a sense of clarity swelled within him. This was more than a personal dream. It was a chance to redefine what it meant to create, to share, and to belong. Feeling invigorated, he resolved to meet with the townspeople again, not just to promote his inventions, but to invite them into the heart of the project. The moment had come to flip the script, becoming the architect of collective future rather than the lone inventor. However, as he prepared to step into a new chapter, a deep uncertainty gnawed at him. Would he be able to win their hearts and minds, or was he about to set himself up for even greater isolation? With a mixture of anticipation and trepidation, he took a final look at his list. It felt like a profound ignition of possibility, yet the thought that loomed just behind it chilled him. Each interaction, each presentation would reveal not only what he could teach, but also what he ultimately lacked. But as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows through the workshop, Mark felt closer than ever to confronting the legacy of his purpose. The challenge of facing those he had distanced himself from felt like climbing a mountain, daunting, yet exhilarating. The path ahead glimmered with the promise of transformation. As he left the workshop, determination behind his every step, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath was shifting. Changing everything meant risking everything. Little did he know this was only the beginning of a much larger confrontation, one he couldn't yet see hiding in the folds of his journey. Mark approached the town square with each step weighed down by his resolve. A sense of urgency surged through him, echoing in the anticipation of the crowd gathered beneath the awning of the old community hall. The chatter of familiar faces wrapped around him, mingling with the scent of fresh coffee from the nearby cafe. It was both intoxicating and suffocating. He was stepping into the unknown, ready to share, yet acutely aware of the vulnerability it entailed. His heart raced as he prepared for what could be a pivotal moment in his life. Would they embrace his vision or dismiss it? Mark had rehearsed this speech endlessly in his mind, every word polished and precise, yet facing them, uncertainty tangled with excitement, a tight knot in his gut. He was ready to reveal his plan for the community workshop, an avenue to break past skepticism and ignite collaboration. Stepping up onto the makeshift wooden platform, the buzzing noise faded as eyes turned toward him. It felt raw and electric, as if the very air shifted beneath the weight of his aspirations. He took a deep breath, allowing the silence to settle. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady despite the tumult within. As he spoke, he outlined his dreams, the inventions he hoped to share, the workshop he envisioned, and the potential growth that awaited them all. Mark described possibilities not merely as creations but as solutions to real issues facing the community. He spoke about revitalizing local crafts, enhancing accessibility, and even exploring energy-efficient techniques. The enthusiasm in his voice gained momentum, fueled by the flicker of hope in his heart. Yet, as he scanned the crowd, faces were not filled with enthusiasm. Something darker hung in the air. Skepticism simmered in their eyes, a reflection of his own doubts dancing just beneath the surface. His words, intended to inspire, felt tremulous against the weight of past failures. Had he truly overcome that pain to step into the light, or was he still shackled to the idea of who he thought he should be? A hand shot up from the crowd. "Mark, how can we trust these ideas will work when we've been stuck in the same routines for so long? What could this possibly change?" A murmur rippled through the audience, and in that moment Mark's chest tightened. It was a fair question, one that paralleled the conflict within him. He reflected on the very essence of his journey, the fear of inadequacy, doing things the same old way, and the yearning for validation crawling through his mind. "Change can be daunting," he replied, attempting to summon confidence. "But without trying, how will we ever know? These are not merely my inventions. There are potential solutions. They offer pathways to redefine our daily lives. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm inviting you to join me in exploring what these ideas can become together." The collective tension shifted slightly. A few heads nodded in hesitant agreement. Mark seized the opportunity. "Let us make this workshop a space for dialogue, exploration, and learning from one another. If we face our fears, we can build something that truly benefits us all." He hoped the words resonated more broadly, aimed at disarming the uncertainty. He challenged them to question not just the inventions, but their openness to new possibilities. The tension sliced through the air as silence enveloped the space once more. He sensed the fragility of this moment. A pivot point. What if this was all in vain? What if their skepticism crushed his aspirations? A part of him wanted to retreat, to hide back in the shadows of the workshop's safety. But deep within, another thought flickered, a spark igniting resilience. Then, as if sensing the shift within him, another voice called from the crowd. "What if we give this a chance? Maybe it's time for a change." A ripple of murmurs flickered through the gathering, and urgency surged once more, mingling with a nascent optimism. Mark felt a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration surge through him, but it was clear this was merely the beginning of an evolving conflict, a battle not just for acceptance, but for the soul-searching of a community caught in a web of tradition and innovation. He realized then, deep in his gut, this wouldn't be the last confrontation. The path ahead would push him further, forcing him to confront not only the doubts of those around him, but also the burgeoning doubts within himself. As he stepped down from the platform, the weight of their eyes shifted from skepticism to curiosity, and that change flickered like a candle in the wind. Confident or not, he knew the tide had turned, but at what cost? Each outcome felt like an unopened door begging him to step through. And as he left, those unanswered questions echoed in his mind. He still faced a greater confrontation, one he hadn't fully prepared for, yet felt instinctively around the corner of his aspirations. Would he have the courage to continue sharing his vision, or would fear close the door once and for all? A chill raced down Mark's spine as he stepped away from the platform, leaving behind the tentative optimism lingering in the crowd. The murmur of voices faded into the background, becoming a blur as he focused on the ache in his throat and the uncertainty gnawing at his stomach. He had taken the leap, but now he faced the longing to retreat, the familiar safety of solitude calling to him like a siren. Walking through the streets of the town, he replayed his words in his mind. Had the audience recognized the sincerity behind them, or had he merely masked his own self-doubt with bravado? Each step felt heavy, weighed down by the expectation that he should embody the confidence he sought to inspire. The deeper questions churned within him, threatening to drown out the flicker of hope ignited by a few supportive comments. By the time he reached his workshop, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that echoed the doubt within him. He stood at the door for a moment, hand poised on the handle, as an unsettling thought coiled tightly in his chest. What if he simply couldn't deliver? What if every attempt to innovate was just another step toward failure? He hesitated. One moment he felt emboldened, and the next, the weight of skepticism wrapped around him like a cloak. Gathering whatever remnants of determination remained, he stepped inside and flicked on the overhead lights. The familiar clutter of tools, materials, and sketches should have comforted him, but they felt overwhelming now, a testament to all the ideas waiting to see the light of day, yet unfinished like him in this moment. Mark settled down at his workbench, inhaling the smell of sawdust and metal, a sharp reminder of his passions. His fingers moved instinctively to the sketches of the projects he had planned to showcase in the workshop, but instead of excitement, he felt a paralyzing fear of inadequacy creeping in. What if none of these inventions inspired anyone? What if he revealed the depths of his ambition only to find he couldn't rise to the occasion? He grabbed a piece of paper and began to sketch again, lines forming the shapes of robots and energy solutions, the graphite whispering on the surface like a quiet plea for validation. Yet every mark he made felt like an echo of doubt rather than a confident stroke of progress. Then, with the pen cap still poised in hand, a revelation struck him, a visceral understanding that proper preparation wasn't merely about perfecting ideas, but also about confronting the very fears that threatened to hold him back. He needed to shift his perspective, to view this not as a stage for judgment, but as an opportunity for growth. Typing out a message on his phone, he decided to reach out to a few local artisans and potential attendees from the meeting. "Join me this week in the workshop. Let's brainstorm and refine these ideas together," he wrote, the tremor in his hands slowly yielding to a sense of resolve. Keeping his focus on the prospect of collaboration rather than personal validation allowed him to see beyond his own insecurities. With a determination grounding him, he recognized that vulnerability wasn't merely a burden, but also a catalyst. It was an invitation to share both the successes and failures along the journey of innovation. As the notifications began to ping back in response to his message, a sense of quiet resilience blossomed along with the positive engagements. Perhaps, he mused, the key wasn't in convincing others of his vision, but rather in opening the door for a discussion that could reshape their collective understanding. But as he felt the warmth of renewed purpose, he also recognized a growing intensity buried within. What truly mattered was the feedback he would receive. Would these members of the community share their fears, their voices eager to dissect his ideas? Or would he face harsher scrutiny, forcing him to confront the limits of his vision? The clock ticked steadily on the wall, resonating with a deep-seated tension that rapidly mounted. A feeling simmered beneath his excitement. The first real test was approaching, one that would demand clarity in his purpose and resolve in his execution. Then, just as he was grappling with this emerging uncertainty, a message came through, its abrupt chirp cutting sharply through the atmosphere of growing hope. The screen glowed. A hint of challenge awaited him as he read the simple but pointed response. "Let's see if you're ready to face the reality of your ideas, Mark." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. He'd have to confront this looming question head-on. Was he prepared for whatever transformation the workshop might bring, not just for them, but for himself as well? The weight of this realization hung in his mind as he dared himself to imagine how much deeper he would need to dive. Would he rise, Or was it finally time to yield to his fears? Mark woke the next morning to silence, the air heavy with anticipation. The workshop loomed in his mind as a crucible, a place that would either forge new confidence or shatter the fragile resolve he had managed to cultivate. He could hardly remember the last time he felt so much pressure to perform, and the stakes seemed alarmingly high now that he had invited others into his creative space. He set about tidying the workshop, more out of nervous energy than necessity. Each tool he placed in its proper spot felt like an act of rebellion against the chaos brewing inside him. If he could create order around him, maybe he could begin to command the uncertainty swirling within. Yet every new piece he hung on the wall, every clean surface he polished, only mirrored the disarray of his thoughts. Time slipped away, and before he realized it, the hour of his first collaboration was approaching. The creeping fear of unpreparedness clawed at him. What if he couldn't articulate his ideas, or worse, what if they were received with skepticism? The weight of this thought drove him to glance at his sketches, now scattered across the workbench like fallen leaves. He had to confront one undeniable truth. These ideas were part of him, reflections of his aspirations and insecurities entwined. He took a deep breath, anchoring his thoughts in the possibility of mutual discovery. Perhaps the workshop could cultivate an environment where he could learn from others just as much as he hoped they would learn from him. This was not simply about sharing his inventions, it was an opportunity to be seen, not as a solitary inventor, but as a collaborator who needed others to help refine his vision. When the first artisan arrived, a skilled woodworker named Lila, her expression exuded enthusiasm. This energy was unexpected and invigorating. As they exchanged greetings, Mark sensed a shift. Her eagerness melted a layer of his apprehension away. They slipped into discussion, but as soon as their conversation moved toward his ideas, Mark felt the familiar pull of doubt tightening around him. He hesitated, unsure of how to present his concepts. "Show me what you've been working on," Lila encouraged, a glimmer of anticipation in her eyes. The invitation was direct but warm, a challenge to unveil the workings of his mind. Breath catching in his throat, he gathered himself. Drawing upon the principles he'd begun to embrace, the idea of vulnerability as a strength, he began to share the thoughts behind his inventions. With each word, he peeled away layers of fear, revealing the passion that underpinned his ambition. Lila listened attentively, her questions probing but kind. The discourse pulled at threads of thought Mark didn't realize were tangled in his mind. What about the sustainability of your energy solution? How could this robot interface better with the user? These questions unveiled deeper aspects of his concepts, driving him to refine his own ideas even further. The discussion flowed smoothly, a dance of ideas and reactions that transformed anxiety into engagement. Mark felt the heaviness of doubt lightening. He was no longer standing alone but engaged in a shared venture of exploration. As they sketched and discussed, Mark experienced something unexpected. He was not only contributing but also absorbing knowledge from another creator, gaining a wealth of perspective that honed his initial thoughts. This realization ignited an ember of excitement within him, flickering between fear and eagerness. When the session ended, Lila offered her insights confidently. "You have a solid foundation here, Mark. Keep it simple. Sometimes the best ideas grow from a single spark of inspiration." Her words landed like a promise, and as she packed up her tools, Mark found himself buzzing, not weighed down by questions but invigorated by wonder. He had not only grown through this experience, but he had also discovered a real partnership in creativity. However, as he started cleaning up, a new message pinged on his phone, pulling him back to reality. The reflection of his progress dimmed as he excitedly reached for the screen. The familiar name loomed. Could this be a warning or a challenge that shook the foundation he had begun to build? Are you ready for the critique ahead? Just remember, it's a dangerous game you're playing, Mark. With a cold chill creeping back into his veins, he realized that the true test lay not just in what he invented, but in how he would pilot his fears through the gauntlet of judgment ahead. But was he truly prepared to confront this next stage where insights could transform or demolish everything he had built thus far? Mark stared at his phone, the glowing screen illuminating the uncertainty that had just settled heavily within him. The cryptic message reverberated through his mind, amplifying a voice he thought he had overcome. He dropped the phone onto the workbench with a clatter, the sound frantic as it filled the silent workshop, a stark contrast to the invigorating energy of his earlier collaboration with Lila. The prospect of impending critique gnawed at him. He had walked through the fires of self-doubt only to find that a new inferno awaited him. Edges of his confidence began to fray, and moments of clarity turned murky. What if Lila's encouragement was just a thin veneer over the deeper cracks of his inadequacy? He took another deep breath and watched the dust motes swirl in the sunlight streaming through the window. This was supposed to be a refuge, a space of creation rather than self-doubt. The walls, filled with sketches and prototypes, echoed the duality of his existence, ambition battling against fear. Drawing on the excitement from his session with Lila, a twinge of determination re-emerged. He needed to focus not just on the critique, but on what that critique could offer. It was a doorway to growth, if only he approached it with the right mindset. Somewhere in this maelstrom lay the realization that feedback could sculpt his ideas, sharpening them into something more resonant and impactful. He knew he couldn't allow himself to falter now. The stakes were simply too high. With renewed vigor, he returned to the sketches spread out before him. Each drawing told a story, every line traced a roadmap of innovation. His mind began to wander once again to the energy solution and the robotic interface. What if he approached these critiques methodically? He began writing down the potential questions he could face, what worked, what didn't, and what needed more refinement. This exercise grounded him. It shifted the narrative from one of apprehension to one of preparation, a strategic response rather than a defensive retreat. Yet an ember of anxiety still flickered. Were his ideas worthy? Would they be met with excitement or derision? Mark started pulling together a list of attributes that made his inventions unique. He thought of sustainability, user experience, and creativity. He jotted down notes on compatibility with current technology, considering Lila's earlier inquiries. Perhaps this was not simply about defending himself. It was about showcasing the best version of his creative vision. His mind danced back to Lila's last words, "Keep it simple." Perhaps the most effective strategy was to draw from that simplicity instead of complicating his explanations. He wanted his inventions to speak for themselves, illuminating their potential without drowning under complicated explanations. After hours lost in thought, Mark leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a rare moment of pride. He had taken the fear of critique and turned it into a tool for self-assessment. Yet still looming was the reminder of the upcoming meeting, the gauntlet through which he must pass. As he prepared to leave the workshop, he caught a final glimpse of the sketches illuminated by the fading sunlight. They shimmered with possibility, yet remained entwined with an unmistakable shadow. He stepped outside, feeling the crisp air clear his mind, but the flutter of doubt stirred within once again. The message lingered in his thoughts. Who truly stood in judgment, his critics or himself? The next day would reveal the answers. With that realization, he pounded his fist into his palm, promising himself to face this critique head-on, armed with newfound strategies. But as he walked away, another text pinged on his phone, this time a short one. "The others are tougher than you think. Remember, they're here to win too." Was he ready for what awaited him? The stakes seemed to climb higher, but he couldn't turn back now. The time had come to face not just the critique, but to confront the very essence of who he was as an inventor. Mark arrived at the conference room, his pulse racing as he took in the stark white walls and the cold, polished table that sat like a judge awaiting the trial. The stakes were undoubtedly higher than they'd ever been, his passion perched on the edge of uncertainty. A trio of figures occupied the far side of the table, their stern expressions cementing his nervousness. These were not mere critics. They were seasoned innovators, each wearing accolades like armor, their eyes trained on identifying weakness. As the presentations began, Mark's anxiety morphed into a visceral awareness of the moment. The first speaker presented a slick audiovisual display, every transition polished to perfection. He felt his stomach turn. The pressure to perform grew heavier. Could he compete against such professionalism? Yet a flicker of defiance urged him to reclaim his narrative. Their intricate polish didn't define passion's depth. When it was finally Mark's turn, he rose, heart hammering in his chest, armed with notes and sketches. He had rehearsed the simplicity Lila had encouraged. He needed to showcase not only his inventions, but also his vision behind them. As he introduced his energy solution, he noticed the way the eyes of his audience narrowed, their pens poised above notepads. An anxious anticipation filled the air. Modern energy solutions must serve humanity, not just efficiency, he offered, his voice more confident than he felt. It was a mantra he had adopted in the workshop, a declaration of his commitment to meaningful innovation. Each prototype he displayed was a vision of integration revolving around user-centered design and sustainability. He watched as skepticism began to melt, if only for a moment. Yet as questions were posed, the underlying tension surged back. One of the critics, a woman with an astute gaze, leaned forward, breaking the tentative silence. "Your idea is admirable, but where are the numbers? Backing it with data would make your case compelling." Her challenge cut cleanly. With a tactical shift in gears, Mark turned to a graph he had prepared. "This projection shows a 30% reduction in energy costs while improving device lifespan. It's not just theory, it's an insight into future potential," he asserted, feeling the response ripple across the room. They listened. Curiosity piqued. Despite the stress-induced haze settling back in, Mark tempered the shadows of doubt by embracing the competition around him. They were here not only to critique but to enhance his vision. Each question offered another opportunity to refine his ideas. This realization was transformative, a glimpse into the construct of his character. The critique morphed from a source of potential despair into a platform for dialogue. His mind raced as they moved onto his robotics interface. "Simplicity paired with functionality," he explained, using Lila's phrase as a compass. "This design enhances usability for all age groups, ensuring accessibility." He sensed the audience's intrigue rise again, a shift in their initial skepticism. But just as he thought he might be turning the tide, another voice as firm as before challenged him. "What about scalability? Can this technology be viable for larger applications?" Mark paused, the noose of doubt tightening his throat. He had toyed with scalability but largely left it unexplored, fearing it would expose more flaws in his vision. The flicker of uncertainty returned, yet he heard Lila's encouragement echo again. "Keep it simple. Stay focused." "Great question," he began, feeling a tectonic shift within himself. Scaling can be achieved through modular adaptations, allowing customizability while maintaining core functionality. He spoke with a clarity born from the depths of his resolve. The tension simmering in the air began to dissolve. It felt less like a duel and more like a collaborative exploration of discovery. The path wasn't without its obstacles, but each challenge solidified his understanding of what he had to offer, a learned inventor learning from those who pushed him forward. As the session drew to a close, Mark felt a surge of exhilaration. It had been confronting, but for the first time, he grasped a flicker of empowerment amid the competitive landscape. Perhaps the ultimate test wasn't just in facing others' judgments, but in confronting his self-doubt and potentially redefining his own standards. As he gathered his sketches, preparing to leave the stage, a sharp inquiry shot from a corner of the room. "So, Mark, what's next for you? How will you respond to what you've learned today?" Caught off guard, he paused, considering the weight of the question that lingered in the atmosphere. This was not just an invitation for critique, it was a challenge for evolution. An ember of anticipation ignited within him as he locked eyes with the critic. Was he ready for that next step? Mark stepped off the stage, the weight of the room's scrutiny still clinging to him like a cold sweat. Questions and conversations swirled around him, each whisper a challenge, yet somehow stimulating. The adrenaline that had fueled his presentation now transformed into a storm of reflection as he made his way to a quiet corner. The ominous query hung in the air. What was next for him? He pulled out his notebook, filled with sketches that encapsulated his journey so far, landmines of creativity amidst the burgeoning landscape of innovation. Each line on the page represented more than just ideas. They symbolized the late nights spent wrestling with his ambition, the countless iterations fueled by Lila's guidance. But that realization came with an uncomfortable truth. While he had sketched a vision for the future, he hadn't yet defined a concrete path to make it tangible. He scanned the conference room, watching as the seasoned innovators exchanged notes with the young hopefuls, evaluating the prospects presented. Everyone was constructing bridges, yet he felt stranded on a far shore. He knew he needed to seize the moment to chart his course without delay. Pulling himself back from the edge of self-doubt, he recalled the foundational principles of his invention. User-centered design and sustainability remained his prime directives. But what did that translate to in practical terms? He could hear Lila's voice reminding him to build on his strengths, not to overreach, not outsmart himself in his zeal. With newfound clarity, Mark whipped out a blank page and began to outline a strategy that encompassed his previous insights. What if he launched a pilot program to demonstrate scalability in real-world applications? Paired with extensive data collection, he could provide concrete evidence of benefits. And what if he reached out to local businesses for partnerships? The collaboration could breed understanding of the market's needs, allowing real-time responses to challenges. As the outlines took shape on the page, he felt a surge of purpose. But as he honed his strategy, the looming question from the critic echoed louder and louder. How would he confront the unknowns? The challenges of testing a new prototype were daunting. Resources ran thin, and traditional funding avenues were reluctant to embrace what they didn't fully understand. Treading water in this storm of uncertainty threatened to drown out his newfound resolve. Forcing himself to be realistic, he began to weigh the potential risks against the urgency of taking this leap forward. Mark practiced a mental inventory of his skills: negotiation, design thinking, problem-solving. He had established relationships within the industry. He just needed to amplify them, create a narrative that resonated. But could he sustain his momentum amidst potential roadblocks? He also pondered Lila's place in this next chapter. Her faith in his vision had continually driven him forward, and despite her being miles away, his resolve tethered him to her encouragement. Could he possibly bring her into this sail too? Team collaboration could transform an idea into a movement, but would she be ready to embrace the risks that came with it? With each stroke of the pen, Mark built not just his plan, but also the confidence that accompanied it. He felt the heat of fear replaced by a flicker of excitement. It wasn't just about proving himself anymore. It was about creating something meaningful that could potentially revolutionize the energy landscape. However, his pulse quickened again as the realization settled in. Action was necessary, but consequences lay on the horizon, uncharted and foreboding. Was he prepared to face them? As he submitted to his own ambition and the test of nature beyond his control, he wondered, would he embrace the tumult of progress or shy away from the fear of failure? His decisions lay glaringly before him, and the calling of his vision resonated louder than ever. The time had come to not only dream but to commit to the journey of execution, regardless of the outcome. And in that moment of possibility, another thought struck him. The success of his approach would ultimately position him more than just as an innovator. It could place him in direct confrontation with the same critics who had challenged him. Would he meet their skepticism head-on and redefine the notion of innovation in a landscape that, at that very moment, seemed completely inscrutable to him? Mark took a deep breath as he pushed his notebook aside. The outlines he'd drawn felt solid, but the abstract nature of his plans also terrified him. Before him lay endless possibilities, each thought a door that could either lead to a breakthrough or an existential dead end. He flicked through the pages again, absorbing the weight of each sticky note and scribbled sketch. They were not just ideas, but fragments of a larger purpose, pieces that needed to fit together. With a resolute determination, he decided it was time to put his thoughts into action. He envisioned a pilot program underpinned by his unique vision of sustainability and user-centered design. But this would require more than mere planning. It called for aggressive outreach. Mark's resolve to connect with local businesses amplified. They could be his partners in change. He envisioned meetings filled with enthusiasm, presentations that brought his energy concepts to life. Yet a flicker of doubt cast a shadow on his burgeoning excitement. How would he approach these businesses? Could he adequately articulate the impact his prototype would have in market terms? Selling a vision was one thing, but aligning it with the pragmatic realities of potential partners was another labyrinth entirely. Mark sat back and closed his eyes. He needed clarity, a clear path to present not just what he believed to be possible, but a compelling reason why they should join him. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lila, a simple note asking how the presentation had gone. He felt a jolt of longing. Her guidance had carved the way for him thus far. Tapping into that energy might light the fire he needed to propel forward. Could he call her? The prospect felt both comforting and daunting. It was time for collaboration, yet he feared the weight of her expectations. Would she still believe in him? Hesitance and hope battled within him. As night crept in and the conference space emptied, Mark stepped outside. The cool air brushed against his skin, grounding him. He took a moment to appreciate the silence and the stars above. Each pinprick reminded him of the vast potential lying ahead. They flickered with possibilities both nostalgic and hopeful. Driven by a sudden burst of confidence, Mark dialed Lila's number. The phone rang before she picked up, her voice crackling through eagerly on the other end. His thoughts rushed to embrace her warmth. They discussed his presentation, the feedback, and his plans going forward. He shared his vision for the pilot program, his enthusiasm unabashed. "I think you're onto something, Mark," Lila said, her voice brimming with encouragement. "But remember to address their fears. Business is as much about managing risks as it is about innovation." Her words struck a chord, unveiling a realization. He needed to prepare a robust strategy that anticipated and countered skepticism. With every suggestion she provided, Mark felt invigorated. They brainstormed practical steps and transformed vague ideas into actionable intelligence. The prospect of working together seemed not just viable, but essential. After hanging up, Mark felt the weight of the world shift in his favor. A well-formed plan had begun to materialize, not just the essence of his concept, but a tangible roadmap to success. However, the gravity of what lay ahead remained. The idea of confronting inevitable criticism loomed larger, casting a long shadow over his newfound excitement. The path was risky, but every endeavor worth pursuing had its price. Returning to his desk, Mark penned a list of potential partners, taking notes on each company's mission, vision, and pain points. He envisioned their reservations and how to dismantle them piece by piece. Yet, in the back of his mind, a question simmered. Would they be receptive to an untested concept? He squirmed at the thought, but internally steeled himself. This was only the beginning. The road ahead would not be easy, but tackling these challenges head-on would forge a stronger version of himself. As he pressed forward, another thought whirled in the recesses of his mind. The critics with their insatiable doubts would soon become a part of this journey. Would he rise to face their scrutiny, or crumble under the weight of opposition? The coming days would reveal whether this leap of faith would elevate him or pull him under. And in that moment, fraught with both promise and peril, Mark couldn't help but wonder. Who among his potential partners would be the first to test his conviction, and how would their first response ignite the spark of his endeavor? Mark stepped into the bustling conference room where he had once felt out of place, now tempered with the blade of experience. The warmth and camaraderie of his collaboration with Lila hovered around him, fueling his resolve. Today marked the day his pilot program would be unveiled, and he was ready to showcase not just his inventions, but the vitality of innovation woven into community fabric. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Participants gathered around, chatting amongst themselves, mirroring the excitement that curled in Mark's stomach. He remembered the early moments of desperation in this very space, and how far he had come since then. His heart thrummed with purpose. He had transformed his fear of critiquing eyes into a channel for community growth. This was no longer just about convincing others. It was about sharing a common vision for a brighter future. As the presentations began, Mark watched how previous speakers navigated questions, their discourse illustrating the intersections of innovation and practicality. He felt an urgency not only to contribute, but to elevate his partners through collective engagement. A collaborative spirit resonated within him. When it was finally his turn, Mark stepped forward with palpable confidence. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, noticing the familiar faces, local artisans, business owners, and inventors. He was facing his community, not adversaries. "Today I want to share a vision not just for innovation, but for a movement that unites our strengths. Together we can redefine how we engage with technology and sustainability." Mark unveiled his energy solution prototype and its integration with user-friendly robotics, emphasizing not only their efficiencies but practical applications tailored for individuals and families. He spoke with certainty, drawing connections between the technology he created and the essential needs faced by the community. Each idea was a piece of a puzzle waiting to be completed, and he wanted everyone to contribute their strengths. As he progressed, the atmosphere shifted. Questions arose not as challenges but as genuine inquiries toward understanding. Business owners sought clarity on potential partnerships, educators asked about outreach for workshops, and skeptics turned into advocates with conversation flowing organically. The engagement lit a fire within Mark, a glimmer of what true collaboration could accomplish. But then came the moment that tested all he had cultivated. A critical voice rose from the back. "Your ideas are intriguing, but how can we trust this will benefit our community's needs?" Mark sensed the weight of that question. It was ultimately what had haunted him during his solitary nights. "Great question," he faced the voice, a familiar tension coiling around him, but he no longer felt cornered. "I understand skepticism. Change is daunting, but I see this as an opportunity for us to pilot real solutions together. Let us adapt, learn, and evolve based on our community's needs," he replied, feeling the resolve strengthen with each word. His answer sparked a conversation, interest mingling with apprehension. Mark encouraged them to voice their concerns, transforming his presentation into a platform for shared exploration. Every answer he provided not only solidified his position but also built bridges to the very people he had once feared would dismiss him. As the presentation came to a close, hands raised, eager to engage in the next steps, the energy in the room crackled, a loss of doubt intermingling with hope. Mark felt the weight shift fully. He was no longer merely an inventor presenting his ideas, but a leader embracing a collective vision. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Mark was approached by several local business owners who expressed their keen interest in partnership. Their sincerity illuminated the bridge Mark had built. He was ready to offer updates and adaptations based on their insight, crafting not just inventions but a shared legacy. In that moment, standing beneath the soft hum of lights in the conference room, Mark truly understood the meaning of growth. His journey had shifted from a battle against doubt to a commitment to collaborative success. He had conquered not only his fear of judgment, but also matured into a role where he could elevate the aspirations of others. Finally, Mark received a heartfelt congratulatory message from Lila just as he was leaving. "You did it, Mark. You've captured the essence of what we envisioned. This is just the beginning." Her support reinforced the realization. Every fear and self-doubt had birthed crucial growth and transformative partnerships, breathing life into the fabric of his community. As he made his way home, Mark felt an exhilaration he had never known. A solid confidence emerged, augmenting his sense of self-worth and professional recognition. He had established himself not just as an inventor, but as a trusted facilitator in the narrative of his town, a leader poised to make a meaningful impact. With newfound satisfaction coursing through him, Mark couldn't help but reflect on his journey. Each challenge had forged his path, each encounter had enriched his understanding. For the first time he understood the essence of innovation. It was not an isolated journey, but a shared adventure, a tapestry woven from the strengths of many. As he approached his workshop, determined to reflect on the day's successes and plan for what lay ahead, one thing was clear: he was ready to embrace the challenges that awaited. With every invention, every reflection, he had demonstrated that true personal growth is rooted in collaboration and the courage to confront uncertainties. And as he opened the door, stepping into the familiar sanctuary of creativity, he felt the pull of possibility extending in every direction. Mark was no longer just a dreamer. He was an architect of change, inviting everyone around him to share in the journey. The moment of realization was palpable. The power of innovation lived not just in his inventions, but in the human connections forged on the way. Now was the time for action, the time for movement, ready to inspire others to step forward into their own transformative journeys. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.